So the minutes, is one of the minutes, Blake, from the last time Arthur was here by any chance?
Yeah, all right, there it is.
Oh, sweet.
So we will get you bouncing just as soon as I'm done. Excellent.
Oh, but it doesn't have any discussion of that, huh?
November 18th.
I don't know if he's gonna come out and nod his head or what.
Yeah, we're on.
I'd like to call to order the March 2nd Bothell Planning Commission meeting. I'll note that all commissioners are present and accounted for with the exception of Steve Booth and Pat Cabe, who are excused. If there's anybody that would like to make a non-agenda public comment, now would be the time to do that. Seeing nobody, we'll move on. Approval of minutes. We have 3 sets of minutes to approve. November 18th, 2015, December 9th, 2015, and January 13th, 2016. Do I have a motion for approval? Any discussion of the minutes? Do I have a motion for approval of those minutes?
Motion to approve is written.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Bruce, I don't believe we have any new business. Is that right? Okay, so we will open up the 2015 deferred docket of plan and code amendments, the continued public hearing regarding the Shelton View, Meridian 3rd Southeast Subarea, Nike Hill plan and code amendments at this time. Bruce, you have a presentation? Thank you.
Good evening, Chair, members of the Commission, and members of the public. I do have a brief presentation which will be followed up by another presentation that'll probably be more entertaining than mine. As you identified, this, of course, is the continued public hearing on the Shelton View Neighborhood Activity Center. We call it Nike Hill as well. And basically, it's within the Shelton View and Queensboro subareas of the city of Bothell. However, I just wanted to kind of briefly outline something that just recently happened. On last Saturday, the council had its annual retreat where they get together and they have discussion items going on. And one of the items that the council talked about was the potential for acquiring the DNR 2 property. Now, this is a property that's about 7 acres in size and basically is right along Meridian Avenue. Now, the plan currently identifies the acquisition of the DNR 1 site, which is about 26 acres. And of course, the commission is making a recommendation that the city pursue acquisition of the MC Coast property, which is about 16 acres. So the action by the council, which was more along the lines of a discussion and kind of an aspirational identification of things to look into in 2016 than it was actually an official action, was to investigate that acquisition of the DNR 2 site. Now, what that does is that gives us a little bit of an issue because we've been working on some planning designations for that area that basically would have a change to the current zoning, which is R9600. And I sent the commission an email just to, I think it was yesterday afternoon, that identified some options for the commission to take while the council and the park board talk about whether to acquire the DNR 2 site or not. And of course, one was you could put the entire process on hold until that gets resolved. You could continue the hearing process, but craft a recommendation from the commission that says, hey, yeah, we should maybe acquire this 7-acre parcel if we can work it out. And also as part of that would be for the city not to be, if the city could not acquire that parcel, to go ahead and go forward with your plan and code amendments as they are currently crafted, which includes designating about 2 acres of it as RAC OPNB and about 5 acres of it as R4000. You could also recommend a do nothing further action. Basically, that means, okay, we're just not going to look at anything on the DNR2 parcel, which would basically mean it will keep it in its existing configuration of about an acre of NB and about 6 acres of R9600. Now, we have a little bit of a different recommendation for you tonight than we had even as yesterday afternoon. And we think the commission could make a finding within its record that basically identifies and recognizes the council discussion, and that the commission fully supports investigating the acquisition of the 7-acre DNR parcel that's west of Marion Avenue. But should the city, park board, and council investigation determine the acquisition of that parcel is not feasible, or the city decides not to pursue the acquisition for some other reason, the planning commission recommendation would be to assign the plan designations as indicated on your basically draft figure 3, which is our land use map, as you've identified previously. That allows the commission to continue its work and get this completed, because we have a lot of items on our plate, as well as gives this up to the bodies, the park board and the council, who are kind of charged with really looking at this type of acquisition for parkland. So that's kind of our recommendation for tonight. Be more than welcome to listen to the commission's discussion on that one. But I think I'd like to do is I'd like to kind of go through the rest of this process if possible. Now again, as we all know, the current zoning is basically on this map. And one of the things that Commissioner Vliet identified for me was he was kind of curious about the relationship between this R9600 and this R8400 within this area just south of 231st Street. And that's going to be important when I get to another slide here. And of course, this is the capacity table for the existing zoning. And as I pointed out, the important number is the big one at the bottom. That's basically what you would get under the current designations. Commissioner Vliet has correctly pointed out that R9600 in this location down here in kind of the southeast area may not be appropriate, since to the south of here it's R8400. And so I think that the staff would recommend that we duplicate that 8400 so you don't have some little tiny peninsula of 9600 sticking into some place that is kind of out of character. The difference between 8400 and 9600 is like 1 dwelling unit, so it's really not much of a change there. So that would basically be our minor revision to your previously identified preference. And of course, I've put a couple of stars on the parcels that are currently controlled by the Department of Natural Resources. Of course, R4000 and RACOPNB as shown there. This is a little bit of detail of this area that basically shows the land area. You know, to the south it's 2.2 acres and 2.2 acres here and 2.7 acres, and approximately the number of dwelling units that are possible underneath those provisions. This is, of course, a detail along Marion Avenue, and again, this is this little area of property within this area that we've proposed that it maybe change to R8400 versus the R9600, which it currently is. And one of the interesting things is that one of the exhibits we have received actually was from a property owner here asking for that 8400. And so this just basically works out well for that individual. What we'll do is we'll do a little bit more public notice and public input behind the people who live in this area, just to make sure they know what's going on here or there before we finish up this recommendation. Again, this is the capacity table. You're looking at a change of about 105 to 260 dwelling units is increased over what was used to be. Of course, these are the table footnotes that just basically give some details about what's going on out there. And there was some provision that we talked about, some special zoning provisions, basically to make sure we get mixed uses in this area. And as the commission identified at the last hearing, it would be appropriate to have some type of a requirement to have the ground floor have a certain retail or office type usage out here, because that's really the purpose behind this, as well as having some type of a minimum residential usage area on the upper floors, the second or the third floor. And of course, again, the idea would be that this would be the mandatory area you'd have to have as residential, and then the rest would be discretionary. So you could either have office, residential, anything that would work in there. So basically that assures that we get this true mixed use provision within this area as we have identified we so desire. Another one is affordable housing. You had some draft implementing regulations in your planning commission packet. Okay, ignore those. Instead, what's going to happen is Arthur Sullivan from Arch is going to have a talk with the commission, and we're going to kind of take this from a kind of a more of a holistic approach and have a little bit more information from the experts on this to the commission. And again, as we have identified, we haven't really officially initiated this as a code amendment. That's actually scheduled for March the 15th. However, there's no reason to think that that will not be done by the council. So really what that means is that the affordable housing discussion this evening is kind of a preliminary, kind of a get us getting going on this particular provision. So what's the next steps? We're probably going to continue with this public hearing to March 23rd. That'll give us enough time to complete some findings for the commission, as well as kind of finalize any changes you may have to sub-area plan language or regulations, as well as, of course, give us a chance to work on the affordable housing provisions, because they will be done by that time by the council. So I'm going to stop at that point and open it up to questions, or maybe there's public comments, and turn it over to Arthur if he's ready. He's ready.
Bruce, I got a quick question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Can you go back to the first page?
You bet. Oh, that one?
Next page, sorry.
That's okay.
What's the difference between the first and the third steps?
Oh, the third step, do nothing further. That means everything gets put on hold. In many others, it's just as if it doesn't exist.
Okay, but isn't that what we're doing with the first step as well? It's just basically putting it on hold? What am I missing there?
It's a little bit different aspect, and it's kind of one of those things where we look at that and, okay, we have a table provision that basically says you're just going to put it on hold, put it over here on the side burner, and wait until the rest of this percolates out. Basically, that would be the the council and the park board having discussions about what to do with the DNR2 site. The do not consider further means it's kind of like, that's like a chopping block. It's okay, we're not going to work on this anymore. So the first one just kind of puts it on hold, and we come back to it later on this year.
So the first one is, let's get some clarification from Parks Board and from the from the City Council.
Yep.
And the last one is, we're done talking
We're
about it.
done when talking about this, yes. That's kind of like almost you'd want to call it the nuclear option.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
So Bruce, would you like us to ask for public comment now, or wait until Arch has given their presentation?
Can we do public comment now? Yeah, I think we can do public comment now. See if there's anybody who wants to speak.
Why don't we do this then? Let's ask for public comment, and then we'll give each of the commissioners an opportunity to comment on what you just said, and then and then Arthur can do his presentation, then we can talk about that one as well. So,
Excellent.
thank you, Bruce.
You bet.
Is there anyone in the audience who would like to make public comment? If so, please just step up to the dais.
Good evening, Commission members. Rich Scrivener, Department of Natural Resources, 1111 Jefferson Street Southeast, Olympia, 98504. Wanted to first give you an update on where we are with the acquisition of DNR 1, the 26-acre parcel with the city. About 2 weeks ago, we received a draft letter of interest from the Parks Board, from John Keats in particular. He asked us to review it, comment on it, get it in shape to something acceptable to DNR. We did that. We returned that about a week to 10 days ago, and have not heard back, but did confirm with him that he has receipt of that, and that is a letter that we would be fully supportive of in moving forward with an acquisition of the DNR number 1 parcel. And knowing full well, it states in there, it's about a 2-year period. The Parks Board seems to believe they need to go through a couple of budget cycles, which is understandable, to obtain the necessary funding. We don't have any idea what the appraised value would be at this time, and we wouldn't until we entered into a letter of intent with the Parks Board, I presume. Would it be the Parks Board or the city?
City.
With the city, okay. So we got a little bit of time, but we've got some mutual interests that we are pleased with and are prepared to move forward. And then I received the news from Bruce yesterday regarding the sentiment from the retreat on Saturday. So catching us a little off guard. Not quite sure how to respond to that this planning commission has done incredible work over the last 7 months. One of the best efforts I have seen statewide, and I've been doing this for about 32 years on behalf of the state. And so curveball arrives, and so how do you address it? So not sure if the planning commission has had time to review that, consider the options. Bruce and I have been talking about it the last couple of days and trying to see what would work best for DNR, what would work best for the city, and how executive management will respond to this new news or level of interest. So maybe I'm up here to answer questions. I don't know if I have specific answers as to how we want to proceed with the DNR 2 parcel. We're very satisfied and very appreciative of all the work you've done with the DNR 1 site. Love to see that body of work completed and then maybe take on the next phase with city council. I'm not sure what your thought process is and how you want to proceed, or what questions you might have.
Does anybody have any questions for Rich?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Roger.
So I thanks for coming tonight and giving us the update. I spent, I think it was 8 years on the Parks Board, and we had a lot of wish lists. And it sounds like, to me anyway, these are pretty significant investments. And I don't know if this has been discussed, but my sense is that probably some kind of bond would have to be issued in order to acquire one or both of these. This is totally guessing. I don't know any information that you don't. I'm just kind of guessing. Was that discussed at all, or in terms of the budget cycles, that kind of thing, or is that way off in terms of? And Bruce, maybe you can address this.
Yes, in fact, there has been discussion about possible bonds for a number of needs within the community, including parks. So that is one of the items that is being talked about right now.
I think
So that would play into, I think, your timeline and cycles and that kind of thing, budget
Right.
cycles. And
I think the primary funding sources that John or the Parks Board has been alluding to have been through state grants, RCO.
And that's been in the context of DNR 1, is that correct?
Yes.
Your discussion so far, okay. That's all I have.
About David?
Thanks for joining us tonight, Rich.
Problem.
Yeah, I'm sure it did come as a surprise. And actually, I had the opportunity to meet with Councilman Spivey this past week, I guess before the council actually met, because he had brought up, we had a joint session between the Planning Commission and the City Council, and he had spoken about that one, and I was able to speak to him for about an hour and a half, and he grew up in the area. Long story short, I know initially we were talking about, this would seem like a really good active space. Obviously, it's not much as far as like a natural area of any sorts. But I guess what I'm getting at, as we move forward with any discussion on this, I would hope it would have no negative impact on anything to do with the DNR 1, because I know the citizens of Shelton Woods have really invested a lot of their time and energy and desire to see that preserved. So I just want to say that. Yeah, that's all I have for now. But
Okay.
yeah, thanks.
Commissioner Stedman? I do have one question, Rich, and thank you for coming tonight. It's great to hear your perspective on this stuff. The question I have is, you mentioned that you termed it, council threw a curveball. Does DNR have any kind of opinion about that idea of, that you just heard about, as far as turning that into a park?
Were we expecting?
Pardon?
Were we expecting that intention? Is that
No,
what you're
what, do you have an opinion about that idea, what the ideas that Bruce, does the DNR have an opinion about the idea of turning that into parkland?
No, I think is trying to look into the crystal ball, and we always have to think worst case. Here's what I don't want to see happen. Put all the effort into the DNR 1 site as we're done, and just like David was talking here, yes, we're committed to doing that, okay? Then if we leave parcel 2 as is. With its current zoning of 9,600 and a 1 acre of neighborhood business, and they don't have the funding for it. Then by default, you have expanded the FEMA site. And you have a large white elephant instead of just a white elephant in the middle of your comp plan process here. And I don't know if that's what has been envisioned with the development of the intersection of 228th and Meridian. Because there's no timeline attached. I know it's early. I know it just happened on Saturday, but there's no timeline attached to it like there is to the DNR 1 site. Because we've specified performance timeframes in that letter. So there's no timeframes identified. There's no funding source identified. It's just all of a sudden appears on a wish list. So it's difficult to respond specifically to that, but I think that's our major concern right now is to go through all this. Don't, keep the zone as is. So basically put all the good work that you've done to the side, and then we are nowhere in 3 years.
All right. Thank you very much.
You bet.
Appreciate it. Any other public comments? Seeing none, let's just take a brief minute for the commission to discuss what we heard from Rich and also what we heard from Bruce. Does anybody have any comments?
Yeah, my initial thoughts are a couple. First of all, the city, the Parks Board, they want to go after the Waynes Golf Course, they want to go after DNR 1, they want to go after McCoast, and they want to go after DNR 2. From my perspective, I'd like to have a better understanding as to how they would rank those as far as, what's their number 1, what's their number 2, what's their number 3, what's their number 4. In addition to that, my suggestion right now is on that second page that Bruce had up, I think we table this topic until we have better clarification from the Parks Board and the City Council. Because again, we can put a lot more time and effort into this thing, and then that'd be all for naught. The other thought is we have two Planning Commission members that are not here as well, and I think it'd be important to have their input. So from my perspective, I think we ought to just take Bruce's number 1 item and just table that.
Commissioner Lee?
I think I would agree with Commissioner Stedman on that for all the reasons he mentioned. And I just want to clarify one thing to Bruce. I'm sorry if I had misspoken, but I don't know if I'm actually in favor of changing that to 8,400. I actually like the 9,600 designation still, since the 8,400 below it has a split zone and it's still attached to 9,600. But anyway, but thanks for bringing it up. We did talk about that area. Yeah, I think. I think I like, Bruce, what you've kind of outlined with regards to the possible actions we could take, and it does seem like we should kind of maybe I have to pull up the possibilities, but keep moving forward with this. But part of it maybe we do need to wait for the Park Board and Council to decide on what kind of action they like to take, and then Commissioner Stedman's idea about ranking and timeframes and such might be quite good to know before we move forward much more. And that's all I have for now.
Just a couple thoughts, Bruce. I mean, we've gone through, I think I landed here in late summer or midsummer, and so we've been pretty much having hearings for several months now, and we've had a lot of input from people, and I feel like we've got a pretty good feel over those several months of what people's concerns are and desires are. And I guess from my standpoint, I'd hate to stop everything and put it off till later, and then try to recall all that public testimony. So in my mind, I'm looking at option number 2. I like that if there's a way we can move ahead with this plan with some kind of acknowledgement that DNR 2 is currently under discussion with the council. If we can zone it per our latest recommendation, and then have a caveat that if this gets purchased by the city, that we, I don't know if there's a provision you can make in your zoning, but at least some acknowledgement that wouldn't preclude anything that the city's planning on doing with it. But, you know, I mean, our job as a planning commission, I mean, if you look at all these parcels, there's plenty of options and opportunities for all of them. We don't know when any of them are going to pop or be sold or whatever. And so for us to just kind of just keep trying to change every time we hear something that could potentially happen to one of these parcels, I don't think that's necessarily our job. I think our job is looking more long-term, and if nothing happens, this is what we want to see, right? Or if it stays as is in terms of opportunities, this is what we want to see. And so, and I do think that strip there, I really like what we've done with that in terms of transition from FEMA to the other side of Meridian there. And so I guess I like the work we've done. I'd like to hold on to that and finish it to the extent that we can, still acknowledging that there's other things going on there.
Yeah, oh, go ahead, Bruce.
No, I was just going to identify that, of course, one of the things about this process is this is a recommendation you will be taking to the city council. And that recommendation will be going to the council later this year. By the time this gets to the council, I am confident that discussion will have been had by the park board, and they'll have briefed the council. And so that discussion will be probably ongoing this year and will probably be resolved one way or another, I believe, by the end of this year. Hopefully it'll be by the end of this year. So when they get your recommendation, they can package it with everything else we're doing. We have basically 4 planned amendments this year we're going to be looking at. And then by then we would have enough time to really analyze this and understand what it would be. It doesn't say, you know, and this again, this is the council identifying what they would like to see in a retreat. They've identified this as, hey, maybe we should look at this as an acquisition possibility. And that starts a process before the park board and the council to have this discussion. I just wanted the planning commission to be aware of that, and of course the DNR folks to be aware of that as well, to keep everybody informed of what's going on here, so that nobody's really surprised that, well, wait a minute, maybe we're going to have an acquisition. So I like the idea of finishing the commission's work on this product, and that can be placed in this hopper in the oven waiting for the rest of the plan and code amendments we do with it of 2016 to come back to the council eventually.
Okay, thanks, Bruce. I think I really appreciate the fact that we have this information at this point, because it's nice to know, you know, what direction the city council is looking at and that kind of thing. I kind of agree with Commissioner Cecil about option 2, but I wonder is it possible, because we're talking about one small area of this overall comprehensive plan amendment that we're looking at. We've, as several commissioners have said, we've done a lot of work to, you know, a lot of public input, a lot of thinking about this. I think we're pretty close to being there, with the exception of this new news of DNR 2. So that being said, is it possible that, could we craft a recommendation, if we so desired, that said, hey, we're going to leave everything in this comprehensive plan amendment as we've just discussed it, and make make a change to say we're going to leave it at R9600 or do something else with it? Do we have the ability to make that, to craft a slightly different version of what you're proposing here?
Absolutely, yes, you do.
Okay, so and I want to clarify that we don't have to make a decision on this tonight as far as option 1, 2, or 3 from your email.
No, absolutely not.
We can wait, and I agree that we should probably wait until we have the full group of commissioners here to really dive into this, because I think they probably, I'm guessing that they probably both have pretty strong feelings about this as well. The one thing I'd like to toss out there is in terms of potentially a slightly different, crafting this slightly differently, that property is split zoned or split designated as it exists, correct? It's
Yes, the northern portion has got an NB, neighborhood business, and the remainder of it, about 5 acres or 6 acres of it, is R9,600.
If we were to leave that split zone or leave a section of this property as that neighborhood business, do you feel like do you think that there's enough room there to still make a viable open space or park area?
Yeah, I think so. I think that the PROSAP identifies a minimum of 3 acres as a park area. However, the more you have, the better, because this would probably be a parking lot, kind of a park or something like
Yeah.
that, so.
I'm just thinking that might be a way to get kind of the best of both worlds, is to have some additional open space and have an area that achieves what we're trying to do on the corner of Meridian and 228th. And is there a mechanism that the city, could that be a subdivision? Could there be something done that would facilitate that?
Absolutely, yeah. I think there's quite a few options there. And the idea would be that as the park board and the city council kind of mature this idea through the year, we would probably come up with those options.
Okay. And then, as far as, you mentioned that later in the year, this is all going to get presented to the council. Is that are we talking third quarter, fourth quarter? Where do you anticipate that happening?
Probably third, it could be fourth quarter. Again, remember, we can only amend our plan one time a year.
Right.
And so we've already identified the plan amendments for 2016 that we're going to try and accomplish. And as the year progresses, we will be finishing those up.
Would it create a problem, and I'm not sure if this is item one or not. I'm a little confused on the three, but would it be a problem since, I mean, it's always better to gather as much information as you can before you make a decision on something like this. As you said, there's going to be some direction from council on this very issue. Are we kind of obligated to, at some point soon, close the hearing, issue a recommendation, or could we potentially keep this hearing open and wait to get that input before we make a recommendation and close the hearing?
That is certainly one of your options. That would be the table approach. The only
Okay,
issue
that
with
is-
that,
okay.
yeah, the only issue with that is that you're going to lose a lot of the synergy and the action and the knowledge that you have now, and you'll have to spend a lot of time later on trying to catch up.
Yeah.
But that's certainly an option for you.
I think we've pretty well documented kind of where we were at at the end of the last commission meeting, I think on, I'm not sure, January? What was the date of
It's
the?
February the 3rd.
February the 3rd, okay, time flies. Yeah, that's all I had right now. I think what I would suggest is let's just kind of table this for now, and let's wait for the other two to be back, and we can reopen the discussion and maybe make a decision on it.
Okay. So is it time to turn Arthur from Arch loose?
I believe so.
All right.
Okay. Good evening, Commission. So this conversation is going to follow the notes that are on page 6 of your memo. We listed a number of questions or issues that typically come up when you're trying to design an affordability component. The purpose of tonight isn't to try to get you to necessarily get to specific, this is what we want to do. We're sort of in the wings waiting to draft something, and we're ready to draft, and we wanted to go through these questions with you as input so we can then draft something. Then you'll have something to look at where you see it in black and white, and then you can change and modify or whatever. But it's to sort of give us some sense of direction from you to the extent we can, so we can draft some code language. You may recall from our last conversation, we talked about components that are unique to every area where you apply affordability, and then there's provisions that would be standard throughout. And what we want to focus on are the provisions that would be unique to the areas that you're looking at. So we're scheduled to have 2 nights with conversations with you, one around the Nike Hill area and then the other around Riverside. And there's the same questions are the same, but the discussion can be different because the circumstances could be different. So tonight, we're talking about having 2 conversations, the same conversation twice. One to talk about the RAC zone, because that allows multifamily housing, or intends to, or potentially has multifamily housing. And then one around the R4000 and the 5400A, because that's a single family to a higher density single family. So, and so the conversations are a little bit different, and they're organized a little bit differently. And so that's sort of the intent of what we want to do tonight. And again, just to sort of hear your comments and thoughts, and if you have some direction you want to provide so we can draft something for you to look at that will be more in black and white. And then when we come back to you, We'll have code language for the specific different areas, but then we'll also then have some of the standard language as well. But that we think we don't need more guidance. We sort of covered that stuff with you in the first conversation, and I think we have enough guidance to draft that part. Okay, so we wanted to focus on the areas. So as I said, the questions that that are listed in your memo are, and these are actually were in the order that I was intending for Riverside, but you're going to see we're going to do a little bit different for the multifamily. But the questions are, what's the affordability level that you might want to look at? How many units might be affordable? Then is there a threshold size of when does this get triggered? In other words, do all projects do it, or is it only projects over a certain size? Do you look at any further relaxation of development standards beyond what you're looking at in general for the rezones you're doing? This conversation is more of a rezone conversation, so that may not be as applicable, but we want to at least raise that question. But we think with the single family, not so much here, but in Riverside, it's a very big question for Riverside, because that's where the question of allowing attached units comes into play. And that's why we put it first, because we think actually in Riverside, that's the first question you have to ask yourself, because it has so much impact on thinking about the rest of it. Not so much when we're looking at multifamily here. And then alternative compliance. Okay, so, and that is, do you allow things other than, hey, we want you to produce the units on site within your development? So those are sort of the questions. So we just want to go through each of those. Like I said, we wanted to start with the conversion from the areas that are looking at or being proposed for RAC, OB, NB. And in your memo, it basically says, again, this is neutral to the earlier conversation. That'll affect the second half of the conversation more than this part, where you go from an area that currently does not have provisions for housing, to an area that could, according to the staff memo, create anywhere from 80 to over 200 housing units. So you're creating a new use for an area that now allows residential. And as I mentioned, this is implied, if it's going to have residential, it'll be multi-story and attached housing. Okay, so so what I wanted to do is I just threw some pictures together, because I know I've talked about having a retail component or not, to just show you some pictures of buildings that might kind of be along the lines of what you might see. I don't have the exact density on all of these, but you can see they're anywhere from probably in the high teens all the way. I do know the one in the upper right-hand corner is 35 units per acre, but it also is it's a very large parcel. This is Lionsgate in downtown Redmond, right across from the City Hall. And it's a very large parcel. It has actually 4 interior courtyards. It's a full city block, or even probably more than a full city block. So, but the configuration is ground floor oriented, commercial spaces on parts of the property with housing above it. Same in the lower right-hand corner. That is the property that had, the first floor was all retail, and then the second and third floor, and that project is actually senior housing in that particular case. And then the other one is up in Klahani Highlands. The lower left is in Klahani Issaquah Highlands, where they have some commercial spaces in a sort of neighborhood area, kind of similar, and it's neighborhood area and then housing above the commercial area. And the other one's in downtown Kirkland. And just to sort of give you a sense of scale, if somebody tried to do a little more, this is more in towards the higher end of the density range that would potentially be allowed. It's still 3 stories, but it's more urban type feel. So just wanted to show you those as sort of pique your mind a little bit about what buildings different configurations that something might look like there. Okay. So the first question, I think, when we're looking at multifamily is to ask yourself the question, what kind of affordability would potentially be of interest? And I start the conversation from the point of view of what do you think would help address a community need? What we say here is that typically that we have seen affordability ranges anywhere from 50 to 100% of median. For rental housing, it's typically been in the, not above 80%. And in some cases, as low as 50, I would consider that sort of a special case, more in the 60 to 80% of median income range. And tonight for the multifamily, I'm going to just focus on rental. I know it can go ownership, and we'll deal with that, but I think at this point, let's stick to the rental to sort of get sense and feel of issues and ideas with you. We'll talk about ownership with the other half, and so that will give us some feedback on that area. So that's, again, the experience that we've seen in other jurisdictions in terms of affordability. Now, what I've done here is you've seen this before, and what I wanted to do was sort of walk you through a little bit of two kind of questions, which is, well, what does it mean to be at different percents of median income in terms of people or jobs in your community? So as I mentioned, the 80% of median is what we would call moderate income, and that's incomes of $50,000 to $71,000 a year. The lower end is 50% of median, that's moderate, that's $30,000 to $45,000. So you can see all of these are definitely, $31,000 a year translates to $15 an hour at a full-time job. Okay, so that's sort of in Seattle, they've had the big debate about minimum wage should be $15. Well, that would be low income. Under the standards, just equating it to standards. Now, what we've done, and we'll see the rents again in another chart I have, so I won't go over those at this point. This chart here is trying to show you different types of jobs in the county and typical salaries for those types of jobs. So you can see that jobs such as a bank teller and hairstylist and retail salesperson, the lower bar in the graph is 50% of median for a family of 4. The higher bar is 80% of median for a family of 4. What we're trying to show you here, and this is where I sort of want to turn over to you, is that at the 80%, at the 50% level, there's a lot of jobs in your community. There's different kinds of jobs. And so I sort of open it up to you from the point of view of, 60, 70, 80% of median. Do you see some needs in your community? And the other thing, well, I don't have it on this slide. So that's one perspective to look at, is from a need point of view or local jobs point of view. But the other point of view, and I have to sort of jump ahead here, is that what are the rent levels of the different affordability levels relative to market for new housing, market for existing housing, and what do different affordability levels turn to? So in this slide, what we've shown at the top in the light gray is showing you what average rents are in the Kenmore, Bothell area. So it's $1,250 for a 1-bedroom, $1,340 for a 2-bedroom, and those are the two I'm showing, emphasizing. The materials we have here also show studios and 3-bedrooms, but I sort of focus on those because that's what most units are in most complexes that are being built around here. In terms of new units, they will be higher because that's just sort of, you guys, a lot of you are in the business, understand that new units, they typically cost for whatever they are, they come in at a higher level. So the numbers we're showing you in the second line, those are the numbers that we use based on looking at newer product in the Bothell, Kenmore area. We've looked at both surveys of existing downtown as well as the Prescott materials look at units by age. And so when we look at those, these seem to be in the right ballpark. We're showing you the square footage and the rent per square foot we're assuming to come up with those market rents for the new product. Then what you have in the corresponding affordable rent, which is a box about 4 or 5 lines down below those, is what is the affordable rent? And what I did is 70 and 80% of median. Also looked at 60% of median as well, and I can tell you what those rent levels would be. But at this point, this is showing you at 70 and 80% of median. What this is showing you is that the units at 80% of median are, for 1-bedrooms, a little bit below market. In other words, the units in 1-bedroom in the general market are affordable at about 75% of median income. Existing average rents in 2-bedroom units are, again, also affordable at about 75% of median income. So that's giving you a sense of what is out in the community today already. Obviously, that's an average rent. There are some that are less and some that are more. But that's showing you what different average rents are. So if you have a rent at 80% of median income, you're basically having a rent that is actually higher than what average rents are in town, even though it would be less than what the unit rents in the building would be. okay? Same with the 2 bedrooms. You'll see that rents would be at 80% of median. Again, the same story. You'd be below what the rent would be in the market for a new building that it's probably going to be in, but it wouldn't be, it would still be at or above average rents in the community. Whereas at 70% of median income, you are about $100 or more below average rents in the community, so therefore you're creating a product that otherwise probably is not as available in the broader community. So that's different senses of input, and I'm looking for you now to sort of talk about with this information, or if there's other questions you have, if that makes you sort of lean towards should we be at 80 or 70% of median when we're looking at rental housing, when we're looking at this. The next question after you answer that will be, well, how much affordability do we then ask for? But the first question I think that's most important is, well, what's the level of affordability that seems to make sense given those factors?
Go ahead.
For the most part, we would be, I'm assuming we would be discussing or talking about new product. So,
Correct.
yeah, so we really ought to be comparing these rental rates to your monthly new rental rate as opposed to the average rental rate.
I will, in the economics, we do that.
Yeah,
The
okay.
question, the reason I pose this question is some cities, as we've talked to them, go, well, wait a minute, we're creating through a public incentive the same stuff people can find in existing housing. We'd rather have some units that are below market because there's some needs based on the incomes they see in their communities, that if we're going to do this, I'd rather get fewer units, but have them be at a lower level than what you might see in the market otherwise. But the math we will do will be based on that second row. What we think it is to the builder, what the impact is to them.
Right.
Let's see, Arthur, on the paper, on what was provided to us in our packet on page 6, and towards the bottom under affordability level, it describes for rental between 50 and 70% of median. And so so what we're talking about here, we're talking about, was there a reason that we're talking more about 70 to 80%?
What we were pointing out in that bullet is that when cities break apart the conversation between say, let's set rent levels for rental units and let's set affordability levels for ownership units, what we found is that they typically they'll have different ranges, and the range, when they have the conversation that way, they usually end up at no more than 70% of median, and it's primarily because of what you see here. But some cities didn't break them apart, and they did land at 80 because for ownership, 80 seemed to be kind of the right, for the math part of it. It was kind of hard to get much below 80, especially for ownership, so they sort of kept the rental there. So we would say, yeah, if you start splitting it apart, which is the conversation we're sort of putting in front of you, we would, most cities have said when they see this, they land there. That doesn't mean you have to. I'm just letting you know what other cities have done in that bullet.
Oh, but I guess, so what we're talking about here is 70, 80%, and we are talking about rental.
Yes.
But on here it says, and for rental between 50 and 70, that's like,
Right.
I don't know, that's just a different kind of case and scenario, different city?
Yeah, every city, some cities have
That's
been.
quite a difference. I mean,
Right,
that's, we're
the
talking.
city that's at 50% of median, they also layered on top of that a multifamily tax exemption program, so they essentially designed affordability, giving 2 incentives at the same time. So the other ones have been at 60 or 70% of median when they've had different affordability levels. I just included 80% of median because I was trying to show a scenario where, looking at your economics, minimal impact on the, different levels of impacts. Because what you'll see, what we're trying to illustrate here, and we can do 60. I mean, what I'm trying to show you here is the difference in the economic impact to a developer of asking for units at like 70 versus 80% of median. And then we'll start, and so that's sort of how much kind of question. So if you want to go to 60 or 50 or 70, we can do that. It's just going to make that yellow bar is sort of the key number. It's going to make the yellow bar number at 50% of median is going to go at 60% of median. And the last column is probably the one that's best. That's sort of the overall product mix. You're at $81,000 for units per unit is sort of the cost to the builder of doing units that are at 70% of median. It's about 37 to 40,000 a unit if they're at 80% of median, and it goes up to about 120,000 if you do it at 60% of median. Okay, and so it's a balancing act, and we can, I only had so many columns, and those are the two that I just sort of put on there for example.
So when I first started looking at the affordability guidelines table, I was looking at the affordable house prices for, say, a couple with a kid, three people, 2-bedroom family, and I thought, well, we need a new category here. We need like 120% of median income, because there's such a huge gap between what I see house prices being in Bothell and what these numbers are showing. But really, we're talking about a higher density, and we're talking about potentially attached units and that kind of thing. So I completely understand that. I also I appreciate you adding the average of the new and the old and the overall inventory. I think that gives us a really good backdrop. I think what we're trying to do is we're trying to provide new affordable housing. So we're trying to give a different slice of our community opportunity for new housing. And so I think that's important as well. It seems like what we're balancing here and kind of our discussion and some of your comments, David, is we're balancing the level of affordability with the incentives that we're going to give, because the lower the affordability, that means the less the product's going to sell for. And so more incentives going to be needed. And so I think that'll be a fun exercise for us here to kind of figure out, for Bothell and for our area, and maybe even for this specific area in Bothell, how low do we go on that affordability, and then how do we incentivize that so that it actually happens, so we don't just throw it in the code and nobody does it because it doesn't work financially. So yeah, that's all I have. Thanks.
I think we definitely want to avoid that, putting something in the code that nobody has any reason to try to use. We've got some of that in our code already that I think we need to work on. I want to expand. Roger mentioned, offering different opportunities. It seems to me that I'm a little confused as to what opportunity we are offering to people in those income levels, because if they can go out and rent something that is comparable right now without any affordable housing aspect to it, why are we offering something why are we suggesting that we're offering something that's in that same range of rental?
That's why I think we gave you a 70% option that sort of takes you to that other part of your question. So, and if that's where your direction, I mean, that's kind of the direction we're looking for, is one slice, and that's, I think, maybe why I picked 70 and 80. The 80% is a slice in which, yes, the builder is giving you something from what else he's building, but it's not necessarily all that different from what's in the community. The second, 70 or even below, starts to give you something that you don't necessarily expect to see in your community. And that's sort of the basic question.
Okay.
So can I,
And so we try to give you some income information to say, well, who are we helping if we do get to those lower levels? And that's sort of why we gave you if we go to 70, is there anybody in our town who's at 70 that we're helping, who may be struggling, or at 60% of median? Are there people in our community that maybe need housing? That would be one, as you put it very nicely, different slices of the community. And that's why the city of Kirkland, they saw those charts and they said, we want to get to 50. And we said, okay, let's us think about how we can get you to 50. Kenmore, we also got to 50, but they're talking huge bonuses. They're talking about going from 20 units, 24 units to the acre to 100 units to the acre. Mm-hmm. So there are huge bonuses, and they're going to get a small percentage, but in terms of what they're giving, but they're going to give, like, in the end, 10 units for every unit that's low. They're going to give a whole lot of units because they wanted to get there, kind of thing. So that's the first thing I'm trying to judge, if that's the kind of approach that you want to see explored more of, hey, we're getting something here from the builder, so that's good, or let's try to push the envelope a little bit so we get a new slice of the community.
another thing, I guess, just a thought that goes along with this as we're kind of digesting this is, particularly in these areas where we're trying to plan right now, like the Nike Hill, right? This is an activity center. And so let's just say no affordable housing, okay, new units go up. They're not what we have downtown in terms of the product and the price, but ideally, I think we would like to be able to have potentially people who work at this corner and live upstairs, right? I mean, that's part of this whole dialogue. And so, you look at you got a butcher, a hairstylist, a food prep worker, maids and housekeeping, and I would bet that most of the people that live in Six Oaks or the 104, unless there's some different circumstance, those people are commuting to Seattle to work. I mean, those are expensive apartments. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's part of the flavor of our conversation here is what is the impact that we're trying to have. And I think Arthur will be able to help us through that. But to me, if that new housing that goes in downtown or in an activity center is only available to urban professionals, then the people that are participating in the rest of the inventory that is used and in the outskirts, then they've got to drive into Bothell to work, and then the people that are living in Bothell have to drive into Seattle. So I think it's kind of that's a little bit of the piece of the puzzle here that at least in my mind that's a benefit of this is trying to give a different group of people who might even be working at this activity center a potential of renting or owning there.
That's a great point. I mean, that kind of crosses over into trying to create situations where you're helping other things, traffic and that sort of thing. Is that one of the things you guys are concerned about with affordable housing?
You're bringing it up, and it is a huge issue with affordable housing. We talk about long commutes. We talk about retaining employers. Businesses talk about retaining employees. I worked a number of years ago when Redmond looked at the Overlake area of Redmond, which is where the Sears is and stuff. Mm-hmm. And it was fascinating after talking, and this was a commission/neighborhood group, and they finally say, well, if we're going to put more housing here, and you've told us we need to, well, and we looked at a part of it, and that's where Microsoft also is, but it's also where Sears is. Mm-hmm. I found that a couple of the members said, we want this housing not just be for the people who are working to the north of the housing area, we want it for the people who are working to the south. And the south was the Sears and the Target and everything like that. Mm-hmm. Those are people who transportation is more expensive. They have a problem with transportation. So the comments you've made, we have heard before, but it's your conversation, and I think we put this out here to see if you have similar thinking along those lines. But we are seeing more and more jurisdictions when they look at it that way, not just, oh, we're asking the builder to, when I first did this, we sort of said, oh, we're getting something from the builder. And we didn't really think to ask, but what are we getting for the community? Mm-hmm. And so that's what we're trying to help you think through a little bit here.
So it seems like it becomes a very specific demographic analysis almost. I guess you brought this up. Say in the city of Bothell, do we know what for the city of Bothell what percentage of the people are at the 50% of median income, and what percent are at the 60?
I didn't bring my needs analysis with me, but yes,
we
do have that in your comprehensive plan. It's what we prepared when we did the update, and what you will see is that you probably what's as important is not only how many people do you have at 50%. There's sort of two ways of slicing that beyond just asking that question. The other is, well, how many people we have working in town who aren't working in town, who are at 50% of median? What's our workforce look like? And of the people who are in town who are at 50% of median, what percentage of their income are they paying for housing? And so they may be paying 40, 50% of their income to live in the housing because they don't have a lot of choices. So yes, you have. I'm going to guess you have between 15 and 20% of your households are lower income, and then probably another 15% or so. And this is where I'd have to go I didn't bring my needs analysis tonight because I have all those tables, and they're in there. But we'll come back to you with that, okay? Why don't we leave it like that for tonight?
Sure.
But I can let you know that countywide, we know 40% of all households are below 80% of median income. And 24% of all households are below 50. And you can sort of, and that's maybe not so surprising when you see the salary. You know, a lot of people are surprised when they hear that, but when you start looking at that salary chart, maybe it's not quite so surprising. And when you look at how high those incomes are, I mean, as we said, 50% of median income is still almost 40, is over 45,000 for a family of four. So that's not no income by any means at all.
When other jurisdictions are considering affordable housing, do they dive into that level of detail in terms of what the specific demographic is? And
Right. I think usually what it is they start seeing the kind of jobs that we'd like for, you know, is it usually goes to, let's get to a different slice if we can. Let's bring it down a little bit. Some cities, one city did get pretty particular. There were certain, you know, it's a smaller employment community. And so they were sort of like saying, here's our two profiles. What does that look like? You know, it's Mercer Island. And so they went to 60% of median. That's where Mercer Island went to. In other cases, it's sort of, well, we want to get enough though, so maybe we can't get all the way to 60 with just this tool, but let's at least go to 70. You know, so then it starts to become a little bit of a balancing act with the economics per se, kind of thing. And that's where the juggling act is, but it's sort of, I find it starts with where would you like to be at for affordability? I think we sort of put, given what we're doing here, I think we maybe are suggesting a little bit that much below 70 is probably, given what you are doing. There are, like I said, Kenmore was going from 20 to 100 units to acre. Here you're going from no housing to housing, but it's not your envelope, it's more you're changing uses as much as anything. So you're taking something that doesn't work from a, you know, using the full envelope to something that does. So I think from my quick reading of numbers, 60 might be pushing. I can show you what the numbers look like at 60. I told you verbally that they're about 120,000 per unit to the builder is what we guesstimated at. So it felt like in this case that might be pushing pretty hard, but if you want us to look at that, we can show you the balancing act there.
okay, one more question about demographics. You mentioned that it's also important to know of the people that are working here, how many are not living here? And what median income are those people that are working here? Is that, do you have that information as well? Is that?
No, I don't have that information. But I think, again, you're a planning commission. One of the things that we have been seeing the last few years, which I hope is a short-term trend that starts to correct itself, is average rents relative to median income are getting now in East King County above 80% of median. They've never been that high before relative to median income. And the highest it used to get to was around 70% of median. And now all of a sudden we're, you know, and it's a combination of rents going up, but incomes haven't been moving as much as they used to move. They're going up now like 2% a year, where in the first 15 years of my career, they'd go up 3.5%, 4% a year. But in my last 15 years, they're going up 2% and even less. So what's a little nervous is that the market, what's out there in general, is overall getting to be, you know, you might be finding less people able to stay in your community because of what's going on in the overall market. So that's part of it. So it's hard to put precise numbers on it. And when you look at your overall demand and the numbers we're talking here, I think it's as much about what feels reasonable in this circumstance with what we're balancing what you're offering for, you know, in terms of value to a developer in the chain versus what level. And to me, it's sort of what level we want to be at that feels right. You're not going to answer the question with the one site alone. It's piecemeal. You do what you can, but here you can't ignore the private developer and what they're trying to achieve.
It would be really useful to know, or to have maybe somebody that was in the private development business come and talk about what their perspective is what do they need? What is that balance for them?
Right.
Do you have anecdotal information about that, or are there people that you could bring in?
I think the challenge there is that at this stage of the game, you haven't approved or required anything. Their motivation will generally be the less we have to do for government regulation, the better.
Yeah,
I think the other way of putting it is, how is it working in other jurisdictions?
sure, yeah.
And in Redmond, you've seen the construction going on in Redmond. Redmond also requires it in their North Redmond single-family neighborhoods also requires 10% of the units at 80% of median. And you're going to see pictures of some of that when we do the single-family conversation.
Okay.
So Sammamish is now seeing, they did their plan 5 years ago for their town center, and we have now in the last year signed agreements with 3 builders. And what's interesting to me is that the builders, and that's the city that didn't split, they're doing everything at 80% of median. And part of their reason they did is because they have no rental housing in their community, or very little, is they wanted to sort of encourage rental housing. That's not the same story for you. So they decided not to do split affordability. But what's interesting to me is in Sammamish, they have a mandatory component, and then in town center, they have, I call them units on the sideline. They have like 400 units on the sideline that you can buy and add to your base density if you give a portion of those to be affordable. Of the 4 projects that have come in, 3 have gone to the sideline to buy units, which is sort of implying the mandatory is one thing, but here's the voluntary add-on, and most of them are choosing to go after them with the extra affordability that goes with doing that.
Interesting. Okay. So what's next, Arthur? Are you
Okay.
going to move on to the next part of
So I guess the
multifamily,
question
or-
I'm looking for you is that general question is, do you want us to, sort of balance using something more like 70% of median versus 80% of median? That's sort of the basic question.
Arthur, so
And then, like I say, this is for drafting, and then when you see it all, you can, we'll still have these numbers for you. You can say, oh, okay, given what it looks like and what feels fair to you in your conversation, let's go back to 80 or let's go something different. But I'm looking for where to start the drafting from, okay?
So what might be helpful, at least for me, we're setting code here, and in your experience, I guess, with this, are you coming back 5 years later or 10 years later? In other words, is this adjustable or scalable
Okay.
at some level? If it is, how long do you need to keep it to determine if it's effective? And because I think that would help us either be nervous or not be so nervous about the exact numbers that we're landing on.
That's a great question, and the answer is, yes, you can adjust, but you can only adjust in one direction. You can only make it less burdensome in the future. You can't make it more. So if you come in and you say, let's do 80, and then find out, and we sort of probably have some jurisdictions where it feels that way now. When you're writing the plan, it's like, well, I don't know if the market's there. 4 or 5 years later, the market is there, and you go, wow, guess we didn't quite do enough. But if you get to that point, you can always say, okay, we're gonna go for 60%, and you go, boy, that just didn't work, and you can go to 70. But you can't start like at 80 and then come back later and say, I want to do 70. Because this is the moment in time, because this is the rezone. You are linking the change in the land use to the affordability. So that's how adjustments go in the future.
Why can't you go lower? Is that a
Because it's taking. It would be considered a taking. No
Okay.
change in land use required, other than to say we want more affordability.
okay? Gotcha.
So it subjects you to that conclusion. Now, what some cities have done, but we're not doing here, Mercer Island used and this doesn't really work in this case here, is they just sort of said, they had a multifamily, but I'm doing this because we may be talking in other zones and stuff, so this is sort of your 101 on how all these programs work and work differently in different circumstances. Mercer Island did take an approach where they said 2 stories is what we've always had. If you want to go to 3 stories, you give us this. If you want to go to 4 stories, you give us this. Those are scenarios where it is easier to go up and down over time, because you always put a price on the extra. You had a baseline. Here, if you're just changing it to it's going to be R4000 now, you're not saying it's R7 and you're still, but if you do the right things, we can get down to R4000. You're just changing the base zoning.
So that might be something where we have a mandatory portion and a
Right.
incentivized portion.
Right.
Okay, so, and one more question.
Yep.
So if we were to go revisit in 5 years, 10 years or whatever, we've already set and we change it, we raise it.
Right.
Or, yeah, we raise it. Does that affect those units that have already been built?
No.
So they stay at the level that they're at for the
Yes.
life of the project? Okay, thank you.
Yes.
And you could reduce without it being a taking if you also change the incentive. Is that correct?
Yes, if you added more yes, if you had more
Okay, so
to
it's
add,
not,
'cause-
it's not a
right,
cut
so-
and dried. you
Right, so for
can't-
example, Kirkland, the development community said to them, and they're down, a lot of Kirkland requires it now. Downtown, when that was the first area they changed the zoning, builders said, you'll never see building here. You can't do anything to make it harder, so the city, I guess we better not ask for affordability. They're now wishing they had. And when they finally got to the point, they went, the only way we could now require it is we'd have to give more. And if you follow the newspapers for Kirkland, more height in downtown is not exactly a route that that's the only thing they had to give. And they didn't see they could give it. So yes, if you wanted to revisit in the future and ask for greater affordability, you'd have to give something with that.
Right, okay. I just want to clarify that.
Right.
Okay, so moving forward on this thing, I just questioned, we've got 4 or 5 different facets of multifamily and how many, are we going to try to cover all of these tonight? And
This is by far the hardest part.
okay. I just was wondering if we're going to be here all night or
Often
not.
when I'm working on stuff, I put the hardest question out first.
Okay,
I
so
don't know
you're,
why, but
are you looking for specific direction from us right now?
to whatever extent you wish to give me direction, that helps us. So yes, it would be helpful.
Okay, so
if-
I guess I'd ask
you
the
had-
other commissioners, do you feel like you're in a place where you can
And again, this is for
offer
drafting.
specific, offer specific direction at this time?
Well, for me, I like the idea of having a mandatory portion and an incentivized portion, and maybe it's all incentivized. Because I think that gives you, number one, it gives the developer flexibility. But number two, I think it would give us or the city flexibility in the future if they want to adjust, for instance, adjust down to be able to add additional incentives and, to equal that out and make it equitable. So that to me seems to make a lot of sense.
Is that a different topic? The incentive, are we just talking about the threshold, the affordability level right now? And-
Often they start intertwining. I was specifically asking for the affordability level.
Okay.
That question is sort of like a next question.
Okay,
Kind of tied
kind
to.
of-
it is,
Yeah.
it is.
They all start bringing together, so that's why I'm not trying to disrupt your flow of thought. But one of the specific questions is, do you want us to sort of do the economics a little bit more around a 70% level or an 80% level for rental housing?
Well, why don't we, everybody weigh in on that, I guess?
From my perspective, I'd like to see some specifics, which basically means, let's start at the 70%, and then let's give some examples as to what the incentives would look like as well.
Okay.
To see if in fact that makes sense for a developer to go, yeah, that makes sense. I want to participate in building some new affordable housing in the city of Bothell. So I'd be comfortable with starting at 70%, kind of looking at those numbers, massaging them, and then coming back and going, well, that works or that doesn't work. Let's take it to 75 or 80.
Yeah.
I guess I'd be more comfortable with trying to see the 60% number. I'm not in the field, and a lot of this is new to me, but I think one thing to remember, and this is all encapsulated in what you have here in the data, but we're talking about, a small percentage of the overall units. And there's a great need for them. And I would think there's still a lot of need down towards the 60% level. So I'd kind of like to at least see some options down there, and also maybe when we revisit it next time to have maybe some of the data that we have on the town that you brought to us the first time.
Right.
It's in my closet somewhere in the packet in the closet. But yeah, that would be really helpful for me, so we can see, because you were stating though that there are a lot of people. There's upwards of 25 to 30% of people that are, what did you say, below the 60%? That are currently renting. So I think there's a huge need for it. I wouldn't want it to deter the development community.
Right.
And I would like to see some type of mandatory requirement, but then some incentives as well.
Okay.
Yeah, I think to tag on what the other commissioners are saying, it would be good to start with the number, whether it's 70 or 60 or whatever, and let's look at that. Okay, here's what the rent is. Here's what that looks like in Bothell. Because my question with this whole thing is, how does a 60% product fit into a market rate project? Does it even work? Or is it really, you know what I mean? And so that's probably what we all kind of visually want to see or practically want to see. And so I think that would be a good as a starting point for, you know, I guess a workshop, for lack of a better term. But if we can see some real things and how that might tie into our community.
I kind of agree. I don't mind starting. Commissioner Vliet's point about 60% is fine, as long as it's draft. And I very much agree with that, but it would be nice to be able to see the more specific demographic data to know, you know, is that something you could bring
Yes.
next time? Okay,
Yes.
okay, good. So
Great questions.
are we all okay with starting at 60% for now?
That's fine. One comment I'd like to make as well, though, is realize that even if it's 60% of the median income, typically you're going to have more than one income even in a one-bedroom. You're going to have two. In a two-bedroom, you're going to have two, sometimes three. So keep that in mind as well when we're talking about this. Is that accurate, or?
That is often accurate, but when I say that 24% of all households are under 50% of median, it means total household income.
Total household.
So
total
that's
income.
why
Okay.
you see different income levels for 1 and 2 and 3 bedroom is
Right.
because the median is different because there probably are more two-person households. But,
Right.
and then when we create a program, the income we look at for each person moving in is their household income.
Okay.
So they would
That's
have
good,
to
too.
be, we don't say, oh, this person makes under 60%. We don't look at the other person.
Right.
We
right.
look at total household income.
Perfect. Good, thanks.
So to summarize, I think we're all in favor of
Okay.
working on the 60%. I didn't provide my feedback on, I agree with that. I also feel like there should be a mandatory component, but obviously we should offer some sort of incentive
Okay.
to offset that.
Okay, so you've now sort of, it's almost like just by answering that, you've started to answer the next question, and we almost don't have to talk about it very much, which is how much? And that's because, but I'm going to use this chart to explain why. So I explained the top half of the chart, and that shows you what we're going to be saying is, what we are doing in this chart is we're saying, what does a typical multifamily building look like? And it's not going to be all one bedrooms or all two bedrooms. And so I looked at statistics for buildings in Bothell and Kenmore and what's the overall average mix. And so you can see in that upper right-hand corner, I have a mix of a little bit of studio, more ones, and a number of two-bedroom. That's sort of what you look at the existing. If I were in Redmond or Kirkland, I'd have more studios, a lot more studios, but we're not still seeing that quite yet. Why that becomes important, you start to see from these columns here, when you look at the yellow bar, you'll notice that at the same affordability level, we'll take the 70% column, it costs the builder more per unit for a two-bedroom than a one-bedroom. And that's just how it's always been. If you want to know more, I'll talk to you offline or something, but that's just how the math works out, okay? Always has. And so it's important to understand. So then what the last column is, we say, well, what's on average the impact to a developer? And the reason why we try to get to that point on a per unit basis, the average impact, is because from my experience, builders basically pay for land per door. And they just say, I'll pay $30,000 a door, and they know that they're going to have a mix of ones and threes and twos or whatever. But that's, and because that's the incentive you're giving, we have to be able to measure against that. And so what you're seeing at the bottom there is, and this is where I haven't done as much research, I think I've done a relatively conservative number of saying that's probably about $30,000 a door is what builders might be paying for residential. In your downtown right now, they're paying a lot more per door. This is north, and so I wasn't able to find enough good data right away, but that's one of your incentives. What I also put on there is like fee waivers. So if you did impact fee waivers, that would be another value to the builder that they're potentially gaining, kind of thing. And so, and then what Kirkland did is we added multifamily tax exemption, and that added a lot of value, and that's what allowed us to get down.
Is that a property tax exemption? Is that what it is? Okay.
Yes, it's for like 8 or 12 years that you can give to builders. So that bottom gray shaded line is sort of, this is where it becomes the crux of where I said how much. What you're trying to do is get that shaded bar to be equal or greater than the yellow bar. Okay, you're basically trying to say, I want to give enough land value or incentive, and that's the main incentive you're giving. So this is just to illustrate how it kind of works is a city will say, for every 3 extra units we give you, we want 1 of those units to be affordable. Okay, so that's sort of how, when it's a build upon approach. When you do a rezone, we're trying to sort of say, the rezone gave how many units extra? And then we're going to say some portion of that is going to be affordable, and then we just translate that to a % of the total project. Okay, so that's where, and so that's if you just do the rezone where, okay, you can build this many units per acre now. You're allowed to go there, kind of thing. So it's almost like to do your idea, Commissioner Cecil, would be, all right, you're going to cap density at 30 units to 20 units to the acre, and you're going to give us X %, 5%, 8%, 10%. If you want to go above 20 units per acre, then you're going to give us for every so many units, every extra one above, every 3 extra above that, you're going to give us another one at a certain affordability level. That's how you would combine them. That's kind of like what Sammamish did. Now, you could do it more like Redmond and say, no, we don't want to get that complicated. RAC allows you to go up to about 40 units the acre. We're just going to say it's 10% of whatever you do. And that's kind of what Redmond did. Redmond said, we're not going to worry if it's 3 stories or 4 stories or 5 stories. We're just going to say it's close enough. We want 10% of everything. So that would be the fine tuning difference. If we want to do the layering some voluntary on top of mandatory with a rezone, you'd have to leave some extra capacity for them to be buying into for the voluntary part. Okay, so we'll think about that and talk with staff about that a little bit.
Does it get more complicated if you're rezoning from a single family to a multifamily designation?
To some degree, yes, because it's coming down to land value. And when we get to single family, you're going to see that we are looking at completely different land values per unit.
Okay.
So here, you've got something that has no intrinsic residential value, but there is still some underlying value to that property today. So that's what makes this one a little more complicated than just going from one multifamily zoning density to another one. You're going from one use to another use that's going to allow something that hasn't ever happened, development-wise.
So looking at our code and our zones, are you proposing a range of zones that this is applicable to? Is this just
This is pretty much,
attached?
this is the RAC area that
Okay.
we're talking about.
Okay.
I'm going to come back, and I think this next go around, now that we've had this conversation, it'll be easier for us to talk about the single family, because you now understand how it's all laid out.
Okay, but it could extend into 7,200 or not that,
You could.
not that?
I mean, that's why we're saying for each area you rezone, you had the same conversation over.
Okay.
That's,
The- So you're talking about the REC. We also have other
so
multifamily
that's why I
zones,
say we have two
R5400A.
conversations tonight. The other conversation is the single family area where you're going from 8,400 to,
Well, but I guess what I'm saying is that in addition to RAC as being a multifamily zone, we also have R5400A, which is technically,
technically is, but we're treating that more like single family because the densities you still cap it at. Yes, it's attached, but the densities are, it's going to be townhomes or multiplexes or something like that probably.
okay,
So
gotcha,
we treated that more like single family.
okay.
Okay? That makes sense. So that's sort of the first 2 questions. This is, and again, this first go-round is the hardest one because we started this, you had lots of questions last time, and now you're starting to think more explicitly around a specific area, so now you really think about it harder, and you've had a second go-round. So now the question becomes, do you say all projects need to do something, or is it only when projects get to a certain size? The original logic behind a certain size is because we assume that affordable units are going to be built on site. And so if you're requiring 10% of the units to be affordable, what do you do if it's only 5 units? That's an inordinate impact on a small project because you still would make them do 1. And if they did 1 out of 5, that's twice the impact as 1 out of 10. So when I first did this, we set a threshold of 10 units because of that reason. And then you go to another city and, what'd they do? 10, so they did 10. And then we found out there were 9-unit projects being built left and right. So Kirkland said, wait a minute, we'll allow payments. That's a fraction of the value that we sort of see that we're, of the cost and we'll do a fraction thing and we're going to bring it down to 4. So now Kirkland's getting triplexes built. So the question to you is, again, these are smaller parcels. You know, there are some places like Mercer Island, they don't have to address this because no one's going to do in downtown Mercer Island something under 10 units. But you do have parcels that could be smaller. So in that case, we're sort of putting the question out to you, should it be something that everyone's getting something because the zone's been changed? So should everyone need to do something either on-site, or if it's a small project, maybe make a payment that's a fractional of the, you know, the cost of what it would be to do, you know, a half of the value of half a unit or a quarter unit.
So, Arthur, it seems like we've had this discussion before. I think we each already weighed in on this. Maybe not the last meeting, but probably the meeting before. Is that correct?
We sort of did,
Okay.
and Jen, you did, and now I'm getting to drafting stage and I'm asking the question, I'm going through the series of questions.
Okay.
In other words, this is one of the questions you'd ask with each rezone. Remember I said there'll be standard things that we're just going to bring to you at one time because we think it's the same? What I'm going through are the 5 questions that every time you do a rezone, you should probably ask yourself. Gee, in this case, should we? So I'm now doing this, yes, so you probably did discuss it, but now I'm asking you to think about it in the context of the RAC zone. So this is that corner area where you're talking about multifamily housing and stuff, so potentially multifamily housing,
So would you like each commissioner to weigh in on this
however
issue
you
as well?
want to
Okay.
provide direction.
Whoever wants to start?
I like the idea of having it on-site if it's 10 units or more.
Okay,
But I also like the idea of if somebody's doing, 4 to 9 units, paying something into a fee. My question is, where does that fee go? Who administers the fee? How is that, how is that then spent to benefit the city?
okay, so to the question, you have choices. We have, what Arch does for cities is administer a trust fund. And cities say, here's money, find good projects for us to spend it on. And you can put, to date, cities haven't put any strings on that money. And we sort of spend it somewhere in East King County. City gets a little bit of credit. And over time, we hope we create housing throughout all of King County, or East King County. There have been some projects done in Bothell as well. So one approach is to say the money can go into the trust fund and do it the same as we do with other funds that go there. Another is some cities, every once in a while, a city has a big pot of money and they say, we want to do a special round for that. Will you help us do an application for that money? I'd say here, I would generally say this is probably not large amounts of money, but that's something the city ultimately, the council would go into a housing account and the council would have options on what they want to do with it. One option is to use the system that the city's put together through Arch, or a coordinated fund system, and others you could hold on to and say it must be spent in a certain area.
Would that be applicable to Snohomish County as well? Because as you know, Bothell is half Snohomish, half King.
I don't think we've ever precluded saying that we would fund the project. And in fact, we are currently funding a program that will be tri-county that we've been comfortable doing because it's our sphere of influence. So we look for it to be in the Arch sphere of influence, and Bothell's part of the sphere of influence.
It's funny, interesting on that point. I just had something go through my mind. I don't know if it's a good thing or not, but you were asking like where it goes. I might be a little uncomfortable with it going off into the county somewhere, and hoping that Bothell would somehow, benefit from that. But I don't know. But I mean, I guess have you ever heard of a town using part of that for part of the ProSAP or something like that? Would that be a kind of a strange thing? Probably not. I guess you're increasing you're bringing in more kids, more people. I guess they need to have somewhere to go to exercise, to be outside. I don't know. I was just thinking that might be a possibility, but I guess we're talking more about affordable housing rather than.
The state
that.
law guidance basically says if you allow alternative compliance, the money should go to affordable housing.
Okay. Yeah, I guess my thought would be, yeah. But I guess I'd like to somehow see it stay in the city and be used for affordable housing development here. But this is a really interesting conversation. It's really also interesting when you're saying that when you put a mandatory requirement on it, that people just kind of keep ducking under that triplex. You can only go so. I mean, part of me is thinking then, okay, anything that's a duplex, or above, you can have some. I mean, that might be the way to get around it. But then maybe you just have a bunch of single-family homes too. So, where was I going with the thought before I started thinking about what to do with the money that we raised from that in the city? It's a good time we're having this conversation. It's just exciting for me that we're having this conversation because of the rezone that we're thinking about doing in this area, and that this is really neat. And until I maybe get that thought, I'm going to pass along the mic.
So in terms of the project size or threshold, I guess, we're talking about attached housing, and originally I was thinking, if you've got a 4-lot project and you're going to make one of those an affordable unit or home, how does that impact the project overall? It seems like if you're talking about higher density stuff where it's probably all in one building, perhaps, I don't know that there's any aesthetic impact, at least from the community standpoint, to that. So I guess I'm not as concerned about that with the higher density stuff. The payment in lieu of, I totally get this the small project thresholds. I'm a civil engineer, and I do some engineering for land development, so I do some of these planning exercises, the way the codes are written generally in Western Washington, they just never thought about small projects. They made the code for big projects and single family homes, and so that just happens. Things kind of fall through that crack in terms of the code, but so I can appreciate having some kind of mechanism to allow smaller projects to. I guess I don't like the payment in lieu of concept in this context. I just don't see where that's going to help Bothell. I just don't. Even if you got 100 projects and everybody pays in, what happens? You give it to a developer and does he build affordable housing? I don't see that happening. Maybe you can share some of your experience with that if that's been successful.
We've built 3,000. We've funded agencies who've created 3,000 housing units in Eastern County. What they're doing, what the money does, is it will then be used with other resources, public or private, and that nonprofit agencies for the most part are doing. Sometimes it's private builders. And so that's where we get the housing at 50% and below, is because we take the money we have, or the groups come to us, say, we're going to go to you, we're going to go to state, county, we're going to get some tax credits, and when we put it all together, we're going to be able to give you affordability that's lower. And we've managed to create 3,000 units that way.
Okay,
so
so
Riverside Landing is a good example. The senior, catty corner from the senior center, that's an example of us doing that.
Okay, so that might be something where that would support even a different slice than we're getting at in Bothell, even though it's not in Bothell. That's interesting. I like that.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, with our funds, we basically say, we want the housing to be at 60, it can go up to 80 legally, but we want it to be at 60 and below, and the vast majority has been at below that even, and we've even got to 30% of median. And it's not our money alone, it's because it's being tagged on and added on to other sources.
So if you have a project that's small and your percentage, like we were talking, it's a 5-lot
Right.
or a 5-unit project, and you've got a 10% requirement, and so you have a half a unit. The one good thing about the payment in lieu of is I think you could probably do a pro rata fee, right? So you can, if the fee's $1,000 per unit or whatever, you can say, okay, 500.
Right.
So that's the calculation. That's what you pay, and it makes things, you don't have to round up or round down. You just makes paying the fee simple, and so it seems like there's enough provisions for the small projects that we can extract some value out of that for the community. That's my take. But in terms of actually having to provide a unit, it seems to me like 10 makes sense, especially if if you're 10% of your, if you get a 10% requirement. So I like round numbers though, so that might be part of that.
So, and what I'm hearing is, once you get to a point where you have whole units, you prefer it on site, but at least present you something that shows that for fractional units down to 4, whatever level you want to go to, you'd have a provision to allow a partial
I like that.
kind of payment.
And are you suggesting that would apply to both multifamily and single-family?
Potentially, yes.
Okay,
I
so-
was asking it for here, and I
Right.
will ask the question again, you say ditto if you want.
Yeah, and I think I agree with that. I do have a concern. Actually, first a general comment. You mentioned that when it was set at 10, there were all of a sudden a lot of 9-lot plats going in, or 9-lot projects going in. That seems to me like that's a mistake in how you incentivize things. If that's the development community telling you that we'll do whatever we can to have to avoid providing affordable housing, which tells me that there's an imbalance in what you're asking the developer to do versus what you're giving them for it. Would you agree with that?
That's a lifelong debate question.
Yeah,
I can give you perspectives, others will give you other perspectives. I talked to someone recently and they were saying it's as much, sometimes it's the landowner who doesn't really know development and they want to be able to sell it as clean as they can. And so when they hear about it, they have no clue. They don't know how the builders that they're trying to sell it to. That might be one reason. Could be other builders who they're worried that unit will affect their market. My experience is it doesn't, but if that's how they feel, it's their land, they do what they want. So,
Yeah.
this is part where, I think, why some cities just go mandatory when they can, because they're saying, builders just want their lives unfettered for different reasons, but, where is our community at? So that's a debate that will go on forever.
but it speaks of the importance of making sure that you balance what you're asking
Yeah.
for versus what you're giving, I
Right.
think. Because, again, we want something that is going to be
Right.
utilized, that people are going to want to utilize, not be,
So
feel like
this
they're being
is-
pulled into.
My perspective, and when I used to do development, I partnered with private developers, I was nonprofit, but is that if it's a totally voluntary system, you generally have to give a lot more value than you're getting back. If you're doing something mandatory, you're looking for fairness. I want you to get more, but I don't have to give you 50% more. I'm going to give you 20% more, kind of thing. So that's part of what goes on out there is, because they're saying, and there's, gee, it's different, kind of thing. So, but I think what we're seeing is when we have mandatory, Newcastle now has mandatory, and builders are building there, kind of thing. It's, again, from my working with builders, it's as much about, as long as you don't want the 10% or 5% to hurt a project, because it's a 90 to 95%, that's what they're really working for.
Yeah.
And your zoning made it so that their 90 to 95% is 150% of what they could do with that land before you took your action.
Okay. So, something that Commissioner Cecil mentioned, I do have a concern about, say, in a 4-lot plat, having one of those homes be affordable, because I think there likely is an impact on the marketability of the other units. Because I think what developers are going to do is they're going to build a less expensive product on that affordable lot or affordable unit. So I think I'm in favor of doing a kind of a more than 10 or more units but definitely having that fee in lieu of for less than that, and making sure that fee in lieu of is enough that developers are disincentivized from building a 9-lot instead of a 10-lot plat, I guess. So, I don't know if that's possible or not, but it's certainly something to strive for.
There's no school of builder. I mean, this is probably the other thing I would say. There is no school of building. You don't get a degree in building. It's different people do it, and companies are all over the map on how they do business. And they have different personalities.
Yep. Okay. All right.
I guess I'd just throw one more comment, and I finally got my thought back together. I guess I would like to see something a little, possibly less than 10. I know you said that you recommend 10, and then as a good number as far as like a whole unit if you're going to keep it on site.
Right.
So I guess as we continue to look forward, I would like to look at some possibilities of maybe lowering that, just because I feel like that as long as that we make it potentially attractive enough for the builder to do it, we actually know that we're getting the maximum number of a more affordable housing in the city of Bothell. Whereas, in Fee of Lieu, we don't know where those would end up. Sometimes they might end up in Bothell, sometimes not.
So,
But so that it would be, so that the developer, it would be an incentive enough for the developer to be able to do it without kind of going one below whatever we set it at.
so that perspective would lead to make that fee high. Make it a penalty to pay money, okay? Now, if the builders heard that and they were worried about the economics of deals, they'll show up and say, they'll make the argument, because I've heard it, I mean, I've done, and I'll try to represent their perspective as best I can, is that they'll say, because they know how we use the money, they'll say, you'll get more for your money because you use cash to leverage other money. And so isn't it good for us to give you affordability? Because you'll end up with some affordability and you're out there at 50% of median instead of my 80% or whatever I'm at. Okay. And they'll make that argument. And the point I put out there is, people ask, is cash better or units better? Okay. And I generally find, and I'm in many conversations out there where the builders say, why wouldn't they want the cash? And I asked them, why do you think that's the case? Because you're sort of saying it right here too tonight. And every group I talk to, because the idea of affordability being spread throughout the community and different types of affordability is appealing to communities. But the builders will make another argument, I could make it as well, that money, power of money, because we use it to try to leverage other money, get you some other need in the community as well. So there's no right answer of money versus not. Builders often like to make the money argument because then they're done. And for builders, right, they know what it's like.
Well, and hopefully, both those options are good.
Right.
I mean, they may not,
Exactly.
we may not all like both of them, but I think at the end of the day,
Right.
I think both of those are good, and wherever we land on it, we could potentially have
Right.
two good options and no bad
Right.
options. So-
And what I would say, you asked the question earlier, flexibility in the future. Alternative compliance, you have a lot of flexibility with, because you sort of have a baseline, but this point about do we allow this or do allow that and do exceptions, that you probably would have more latitude to correct and over time.
The other thing to remember as we think through this process is a lot of the lots that would be redeveloped are infill lots anyway. So they're not that large. There's not a lot of large spaces. Now we've got the Nike Hill site, and that's a different case. But for the most part, a lot of these are going to be infill sites. So they're going to be smaller. They're going to be, 20 units and less.
Right. For Riverside in particular, and I would say your fourplex example, I probably wouldn't be, if you're going to say they have to provide it on site, I'd be saying that's a pretty hard burden on somebody. Or you'd have to have a much higher affordability requirement. Okay, that one gets to 120%, 120% of median.
Right.
So you'd almost have to do it that way.
Do we want to try this? Do we want to just take a quick poll of the commission, say, on that 10 unit, and see who's in favor of it being 10 or more units and who would like to see it lower? Is that something that we should do now, or?
I think, as, we were asking for maybe some more pavement level information to start this discussion. I think we could maybe flesh that out as we're looking at what these projects look like.
But I think,
So I thought I heard something like, let's try a threshold where above that, and let's pick 10, and maybe we end a little bit different, where you're looking for on-site, and for smaller, and I'll go down, I guess I'll go to 4, to say for those, it's a partial, and you have an alternative that you can do besides on-site. Is that
what about 5 to 9 then? What?
4 to
Yeah.
9 is what I'm saying,
Oh,
down to
4
4.
Okay, down to
saying.
4, and then less than 4?
Well, if you want me to go lower, I can go down to 1. I think part of the reason for maybe not 1 or 2 is that feels so small that might be like the homeowner just trying to rebuild a home or something. I'm not sure why Kirkland stopped at 4.
One thought is basically fourplex on up is different financing. Single family duplex triplex is different financing than a fourplex and up.
Okay.
But you can change those thresholds. I mean, again, I'm just trying to draft and stuff. So
Could you give the developer an option on that and tell them you can do it either way? You can either do it on site or?
right, that's what I'm saying.
Oh, that is what you're saying?
Yeah,
Okay,
right.
okay, all right. So is everybody okay with that
Yeah.
approach?
I like it.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. I'm actually gonna, this is more related to single family. So why don't we, for the multifamily one, skip this question? And I do believe actually, we talked about alternative compliance. So I think you've talked about that and given some guidance on that. And so I think at this point I have some direction on that as well. Yes.
Quick question on the part of the alternative compliance is providing affordable housing at another location.
Yes.
Can you give us a sense of what that looks like on a typical
Good.
project?
Hasn't been done that often. Might work in Riverside, might even work here, where we had like in North Redmond or in Kirkland, same builder doing two different properties that were both smaller, and said, can I just do them all on this one property instead of having to do them on, now, when you write it the way it's written here, it could be broader than that. I mean, but that's where I've seen cities approve it, is when it's been the same builder, I think, was it the same builder? Two sites near each other, relatively small, why don't we let you just do them all on one site?
Or if they could come to an agreement with another developer, a
Or, yeah,
contract, something?
right.
Okay.
Yeah.
But if it's in a different city, it wouldn't benefit the city of
So
Bothell.
usually the cities have said for off-site, in fact, Redmond says has to be same neighborhood or a better location for affordability, which means like near transit. So they're basically, they're really ratcheting down where it can go. So yes, off-site has, all the cities have said in the same community. And they've usually said you have to have the deal figured out before you start building this site, not a promise to be done at another time. So if you'd like, we can put, and actually I think what we were gonna do is put this in your general section. So we'll have language on this in general. And then what you'd say is, should alternative compliance or which pieces would apply in different neighborhoods.
Particular area, yeah.
Okay. All right. So that's, I think we've kind of hit the overview of the multifamily. And it's probably, there's one question I'd like to at least start tonight with the single family, because I have some pictures to show you too, if you don't mind. So is there any, before we move on to that, is there any other questions about the multifamily or, yes?
Just a real quick question for me, and I assume the answer to this is yes, but we're in the kind of early stages of talking through this, and so the things we're kind of giving you
Yes.
guidance towards, I assume will be malleable over time, not
Yeah.
that we're trying to waste any of your
Correct.
time doing research.
you
But yeah,
take
but we're
as
just
many-
going with the best data available at the time, okay, because we're missing a couple commissioners. And,
Right, no,
Okay.
for sure, and this is your first go-round. I spent a year in Bellevue the first time they did this stuff. So, they were the first city to do something. So I get it, and that's what we're here for. We're your staff, and it's the first time you're doing it. And it gets easier to go along, but this is important that you understand the concepts so that you're grounded in making what your recommendations are. So however many meetings it takes, we'll help you with that. Okay? Okay, so now, this is the, ignore the numbers now, right? For the night. But the idea is, this is, oops, I'm sorry, I didn't put it down. Anticipated residential development is ownership, lower density, probably detached for the market rate units. So on this one, the first question I do have is development standards, and should there be some flexibility in the type of units you allow to be built to accommodate affordable units? And I know you guys talked about this a lot and you had a lot of questions. So what I've done here, and the reason I did lots of slides to just show you images is because in 5400A, attached is allowed anyway. So you're going to see that, well, it's not that big a stretch, but in Riverside, it's a big question because of the zoning that you're looking at. So I thought it might be helpful for you, and I've got them, I think I was surprised as I was finding pictures, some of the stories behind some of them. So if that's hopefully helpful. So I'm trying to help you with the conversation about multiplexes in general, which the council has asked you. So this isn't only about affordability and showing you these examples, but I know you guys raised lots of comments, so I'm trying to show you different pictures so you can get images of things that would concern you or you think are good or not so good, and thinking about the idea of something other than a traditional single-family house. These first two that I have here are both duplexes. One is in Bellevue, and the other one is in a nondescript neighborhood. It was an infill where the city of Redmond sometimes allowed duplexes in certain neighborhoods. And so this one, so both of these are market rate units. And both homes in both of these are market rate. The reason Claridge probably did it in the first place is it was right when Bellevue was in transition from all developments doing affordable housing, and they allowed duplexes, to taking that requirement away as a citywide requirement. And so they may have already gone through all the plating for this duplex. The point I'm sort of making is they still built a duplex in this single family neighborhood, and this is kind of what they look like. And then the other one, it's a standalone. I think it's infill lot that was a standalone duplex, where if it's a slightly larger lot in Redmond, you can do a duplex. So those are two examples for you to see. These next ones, these are all affordable attached units that are in either otherwise single-family neighborhoods, or in one case, which actually surprised me, the one on the right, that's a duplex, and one half of the duplex is affordable. And you might notice, you can't tell from the angle, you notice the other duplex has a bigger garage. That's a market rate one. So that was a duplex in which one unit was market rate and one was affordable. The one on the, and I think it might be the same story, the one on the left, where you'll notice that here in this one, they put the garages on different elevations. It's hard to tell. I didn't have the best selection of photos for this project. The Woodlands Ridge one is a relatively new project that was built in North Redmond, which is an area that you would think of as completely single family. Indigo is on 85th between Redmond and Kirkland, just as you go up the hill outside of Redmond on the north side. And that's a development in which the market rate units, for the most part, are duplexes, even though it's an area that's sort of, this is like your 5400A. And I'm sort of bringing up some of the example is private builders, even in the East King County market, are saying, I will build attached market rate units, okay? When I'm in lower density, in these lower density areas now. These here, this is a neighborhood called Lakemont Crest, which has no linkage to affordability, and the builder actually includes single-family homes and duplexes intermingled amongst one another. So the brown home is a single-family home, and the one on the right is a multiplex, is a duplex. You can see the two doors, and then the way and it's not the same building, but the garages work the same. You notice how because of the slope side, they were able to build the garages on the downhill slope off to the side. So this is a neighborhood up in whatever they call that. I always forget what they call that area up on the hill, Viewmont, on the south of 90 up on the hills, where way up the hill there, you go into this neighborhood, and about a third of the homes are attached units and 2/3 of them are detached single-family homes. And I think this is sort of probably had some steep slopes or something, and this was a way the city allowed them to get their density. But you can see they designed the multiplexes in this building and this neighborhood to sort of fit in or have more of a single-family character.
Are you saying that the two homes on the right, the upper and lower, is that the same home? Is that what you're saying?
No, what I'm saying is that I didn't quite get it right. That what you do see is on the lower left, you see the flag?
Yes.
That's the same home as the one on the lower
Okay.
right. But I'm saying that the garage treatment on the upper right is similar to the one that you see, but
Gotcha, okay.
they both have flags. I don't know, so I distinguish them that way. But the one on the upper left, that's just a single-family home. And one of the things you notice with that in that neighborhood, even though that duplex is large, it's about the same scale as the single-family home.
It's expensive.
Now, this one is this is a new development in North Redmond. This is a duplex, and the house, what I'm showing you in the upper left is the duplex unit. Both the units are affordable. The house on the lower left is the house immediately adjacent to it. And then you'll notice I walked up the street, and then I took a picture so that you can see single-family homes across the way. And do you know why I wanted you to show this picture? Can you see from the design point of view, the point that I often hear about duplexes, the wall of garages? Look at how much garage frontage you have in the duplex, and look at the garage frontage you have in those homes, and especially the homes in the background. In fact, the homes in the background have that typical recessed, way back, 10 feet back front entryway. So you might look at that duplex by itself and say, you know, that's a fair amount of garage space, but I'm saying, well, but look at the rest of the homes in that same neighborhood that are market rate homes. Now but I will point out something that I did notice. I wasn't real impressed with the builder. One of the things you talked about is exterior finishes, and the code, this will be in the general section, will say that exterior finishes are expected to be of the same similar quality. So the units can be smaller, the interior finishes can be entry level, but the exterior finishes are anticipated to be of similar quality, the same quality as the exterior of the other homes in development. Obviously in multifamily they're not going to do that, but those same provisions come in play for this kind of situation. Now, this is actually in Seattle, but I wanted to show you this because this is a fourplex. Each one is, actually, I think it's a fiveplex. 2 fiveplexes, again, this is Capitol Hill, but it is a single family type neighborhood in Capitol Hill, just to sort of give you an idea of how a multiplex can potentially work. And so here you have flats. And then when you go around, the bottom left, bottom right is the backyard. And what they actually have is you drive in between the 2 homes and you tuck underneath that courtyard for your parking. And then that courtyard is about 5 feet above grade, and the parking goes down about 3 feet. And that's their backyard, is that type of courtyard. And then you can see the stairway goes up to those upper units. And so the entryways are all over the building. They're not all in the front. They're in different parts of the building. And this actually gets to this gets to a pretty high density. This is probably over 20 units to the acre, these homes here, when you put it together, lots and everything. But just sort of the idea that another way of doing a multiplex isn't, you know, door to door, but rather a building where they split it up in flats along those lines.
Did you say the garage was underneath the courtyard on that?
Yes,
And those are market rate or affordable?
this is all market rate housing.
Okay, okay.
Right. It was just a market rate development built. Got a lot of attention in Seattle about 15 years ago. Now this here, and we're showing you, this is a development, again, in that same area of Bellevue. And this is where the builder, when he started, would have had to do affordable units. So he got everything designed and permitted and processed. And then the city changed the rules. He paid a fee in lieu. And those are now market rate duplexes. And I just gave you the lot for that neighborhood so you can see the size of the lots that the duplexes are on. And then you can also see how they treated the garages for these. And this is where having a little bit of slope helps. So you can see in both cases the garages are split and one on different elevations. And then the brown house on the upper right, I show you the market rate home that is next to the duplex. And these duplexes are selling for like $500,000 or more each, kind of thing, per unit. Then I thought, oops, sorry, I wasn't supposed to have the court in there. Ignore the middle picture. What you see around that are cottages. And both of these developments are in Kirkland and Redmond in the Rose Hill areas, one in Kirkland, one in Bellevue. I mean, one in Kirkland, one in Redmond. And the thing with cottages is more times than not, they don't happen in 1 or 2 at a time. They'll be done, and you can sort of see the site plan. That's the site plan for the Redmond one there. So there's usually a cluster. They'll have 10 or more. Then they'll have gang parking at one end of the site typically. But I wanted you to at least see pictures of what's been done locally and whether or not that might fit in some parts of the areas you're looking at or not. But generally that's sort of, you need a little bit bigger parcel to make something like that work. And the cities will generally count each. In Kirkland, they count each of the ADUs like it's 0.6 units. There is no affordability in the Kirkland one. The Redmond one, because it's over 10 units, they did do a unit, and they actually did. Redmond, what they let you do is they let you do, if you do a 1 unit at 50% of median, it equals 2 at 80. And so what they did is they did because the cottages were just so popular, they thought it was more worthwhile to them to make 1 unit affordable at 50% of median than to have 2 at 80. So that's what they did in that situation. And then finally, these are a couple that are now under construction. And the reason I'm showing you these is this was sort of an interesting approach. Again, this is in North Redmond, and it's a mixture of some single family and multiplexes. So this is kind of like a PUD again. But the reason why I'm showing a picture of this is not quite done yet is that the dark brown building is a triplex, with the two end units being the market rate units, and the middle unit is the affordable unit. And that wasn't required of the builder. He could have done he has a total of 6 affordable units in this development, so he could have done, a couple duplexes, but he chose instead, for whatever reason, to do these triplexes with some of them market rate and some of them, and then some of the middle units are the affordable. So examples of how the market is starting to think, a little differently about what they do. And this is being done, I think this is, what did Cam West become? I can't remember who bought the national group that bought them out is doing this project. And then finally, this is in a neighborhood in Bellevue, 30-plus-year-old home that's a fourplex, right in the middle of a single-family neighborhood. Basically, wrapping around a corner, there's like 2 or 3 of these in this neighborhood. They just wrap them around the corner with 2 entrances on the uphill side, and then around the corner is another entrance, and I think it's probably a triplex. But just an example of how, even long ago, some cities allowed that, and some builders said this is a way to fit into a single-family neighborhood, a multiplex-type building. And then finally, this is a little bit different scale, but this is a buffer between a multifamily and a single-family zone in Redmond, southeast Redmond area. And what you have here is every one of these is, again, all market rate. And what you have here is 3 units in each building. You have 2 on the front, and you can see the entrances, and then the third with the recessed is actually a second-floor unit above the garages for all 3 units. And so they have an alleyway, and they load the houses off the alleyway. Probably not what you're looking at immediately, but since you're looking in general at stuff, I thought it'd be interesting for you to see that kind of example too. Again, all market rate.
Oh, all market rate.
All market rate, right. This was before Redmond started mandating affordability in that neighborhood. So, but that was a solution for a builder to sort of transition from one area to another. And across the street, one side of the street is this, the other side of the street are single family homes. So that's sort of a range of different ideas. So the first question to you, because it has a huge ramification on that economics chart, is are you willing to consider allowing some form of attached housing to meet an affordability requirement in a lower density zone?
I'd say based on the examples that you brought, certainly. I think there are very good examples of very nice looking projects in neighborhoods that don't stand out as though they are, lower income.
I agree. I guess I like that flexibility. I find some of the most interesting places that I visit, whether it's in Washington State or elsewhere, have kind of mixed use throughout them. And so sometimes I think maybe we get so wrapped up in a single zone. I know we can't get into breaking a certain parcel out, but I think I'd be interested in seeing that as a possible component. Because, like you said, like the pictures you showed, you drive by it, you'd have no idea that and you're getting more people in there, you're giving more people the opportunity to live in Bothell, so it's good.
It seems to me, I mean, I've designed and seen some 9600 subdivision, and those are pretty big lots. I mean, you've got some space between the buildings, and so it seems like maybe the higher density, I don't know, maybe the 7200, maybe 84, I don't know, but 9600, those are big lots, and those are big homes, and they're clearly separate from each other. 80-foot lot circle, that kind of thing. And so, but maybe as we got down to the little bit higher density, it might make more sense. I mean, some of that stuff is some really good looking stuff. Yeah. But I don't know that in a 9600 development, you're going to have these huge homes, and then you're going to wrap around the corner, and it's going to look, it'll definitely be different. I'm not saying it would be negative, but it would be harder to tie that into a larger lot development, it seems like to me.
So just tonight, this almost doesn't apply. I mean, you can do this, right? Under the 5400A, they'll be allowed to do this. This is almost more for Riverside where you're talking about going from 9,600 to 70.
7,200. And that's what I'm thinking as well. This is more for the smaller, R6000, R7200. Maybe even the R5400D detached or something of that nature. I mean, I think it gives some flexibility there.
I agree. I think regardless of the density of the zone, that there may need to be some relaxation of some of the criteria, like the lot circle diameter, to help accommodate this, because the lot circle diameter is, what it does is it gets very restrictive in terms of the width of your lot to the depth of your lot, and I think you need some flexibility to make this work. For example, Bruce, I think 9,600 is an 80-foot lot diameter, is that correct?
Yes, the lot circle within the 9,600 is 80 feet.
So in that context, your lot has to be 80 feet wide, essentially. I mean, there's a little bit of flexibility with that depending on the geometry of it, but that's a pretty, I mean, it'd be much easier to accommodate some of these different uses if you didn't have that restriction of having your lot that wide, I think. So that's my thought. So I think it's okay too. Are we talking about that it being optional for the developer to use different building types?
You mean like a duplex if they want it?
Correct.
Yes.
Okay, so they could do affordable, full-size, regular units at their option. Okay, I think that's,
I haven't seen them do it. They're going to have, but
They're gonna trend toward-
their choice.
right.
But you have raised a great question about, your lot circles and stuff, because Bellevue didn't have lot circles when I was most intimately involved with dealing with single family. Redmond does. If you want this idea explored, we probably need to look at that, to look at those kind of points, because that could very well be needed. What we did in Bellevue when I was way back then, we basically said, we're going to treat that single build, that 2 units, and the lot, that's the combined lot for the 2, as one lot. Even you can subdivide, and you're allowed to subdivide it, and they're basically saying, we only make you meet the exterior perimeter requirements, and we don't make you have building separation for that unit. So that's how they wrote the rules to sort of allow the unit to be physically subdivided. And so we basically said, think of it as a single lot, even though there's 2 homes on it, from the land use point of view. And that's probably something we would need to sit down with your staff and go, what's the way, given all the rules, to fit it in? And if you like, that's sort of what we need direction. Should we look into
So
that?
we're looking for flexibility in
Right.
these zones
Right.
for
And-
developers.
Well, that's what we're looking, if
try to
you're
make it
interested
work.
in the idea, then we need to go and have staff, we all need to look at that a little bit.
So I'm totally for that. I think you need flexibility, especially if you're going to make it work in these larger lots.
I'm guessing that the lot circles in Redmond and Bellevue are probably a smaller diameter than Bothell.
I don't know.
Yeah,
That's what I'm saying.
just conjecture. But
Bellevue didn't even have lot circles when I
okay,
did this. That's a newer idea.
Okay.
I've been around a
So-
long time.
I'd like to pause for a minute here and make a suggestion that we've been here for a couple hours. We've got one guy that won't be named that is probably on his last legs here. He shouldn't be here at all. He's sick, and I'm wondering if we should maybe suspend this discussion to the next round, if it's a legitimate, if it's a logical place a break point.
If I would say we hit the main thing for the single family. I'm trying to think if I could maybe do a little directive comment, which is threshold size. Should we take a similar approach that you talked about for the other alternative, which is sort of the 10 and under 10 kind of thing? Then I would say from that point of view, this is probably a good break point because we're at the affordability level and we have to do this chart all over again. So you have to get your brain going again. So it might be just as well to stop at this point. We can walk you through that because that's also relates as much to Riverside. So we can do this part for Riverside. Our next scheduled time with you is Riverside. And so we can find the stop at this point.
So would the commissioners like to comment on the threshold size issue real quick? Is that what you're asking, Arthur?
Yeah.
Okay.
That might be helpful to just get your sense. And since you just talked about it, that might be a quick conversation for you.
I like the 10-unit and 4-unit threshold again, same as we had before.
I feel like maybe there's something a little bit lower. I feel like 10 is a number that's used a lot because people just like the number 10 because it's round. And but so yeah, I guess I'd be okay with that for now since we'll be revisiting it more in the future.
Okay.
I actually was, as we were going through the discussion on the multifamily, I was thinking of single-family product when I was doing this, and I think they apply. I'm fine with the same for multifamily and
Okay.
single-family.
Ditto.
Okay.
Ditto?
Ditto.
Ditto. Okay.
Great.
All right.
One additional question I wanted to, before maybe next time, that I'd be really curious about the fee in lieu.
Yes.
I'd love for, I know you don't have to be exact, but some estimates on what that looks like, you know, what that's looked like in the past. Because in my mind, it's interesting because I think about it because what we're trying to do is create affordable housing in the long term for the life of the project. And I guess I'm trying to figure out in my mind whether I'm going to like that option, fee in lieu, for you know, in a bigger project maybe, or even a smaller one, which might be the only option with regards to how much a developer or that would have to pay up front as opposed to the savings over 40, 50 years for, and I know it's probably going to be, but he's having to come up with the money up front, so it's going to be much less. But I'm just trying to get an understanding about how that would play out.
Okay.
Does that make any sense? I'm
Yes.
just trying to see about
Yes.
how
And-
big or how small those amounts are that.
Okay. Yep.
Okay.
I would be interested in seeing those amounts as well.
Ditto.
I would move we adjourn.
Well, we got to get through a little bit of process here before we do that. Bruce, are we looking to extend this?
I think we should continue this hearing
Continue?
to
Okay.
March 23rd on the Nike Hill section. You have a hearing next week on Riverside, the 9th.
Do I have a motion to continue the hearing?
So moved.
Motion to continue the public hearing regarding the Shelton View Meridian 3rd Southeast subareas to March 23rd.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay. No study session, I'm assuming, Bruce?
No study sessions tonight, that's correct.
Any old business?
No.
Reports from staff?
That's it?
Are you sure?
Yes.
Okay. Reports from members? Any news? All right, do I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn?
A second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.